Judge Peters, thank you for your remarks at the end of Tuesday's meeting. I would have preferred to respond immediately in hopes of having a constructive conversation, but as that was not allowed, I'll respond here, and we'll post this video via social media and on our website. In the interest of time and for ease of following the discussion, we've broken your remarks into segments by topic, and I'll respond to each of them individually. It's not our intent to twist your words or manipulate anything that you may have said, so along with this video, we'll provide a link to the full recording of Tuesday's Commissioner Court's meeting, which is hosted on the county's YouTube webpage.
Okay, so under interest items, I've got a few things that I need to address because there's been some false accusations, including in last week's meeting, that allege that there's a lack of transparency about the East Loop. For clarity, I want to walk through the sequence of events leading up to the November 2022 bond election. So first, there was a public workshop on July the 28th, 2022. There were over 40 in attendance.
Let's review the sign-in sheet from that July transportation workshop. There were 45 citizens there in addition to the members of the court. 34 were government employees. 9 were paid to be there representing their employer or some other quasi-governmental agency such as the Chamber or the EDC. There was 1 member of the media there and 1 person who signed in as citizen, and that was Chuck Conderla, who was running for office at the time. While I concede that these 45 would all be considered citizens, let's also remember that they either had actual business before the court or were hoping for business that may come out of the court's proceedings. But let's not lose sight of the bigger picture, which is the fact that we, as your constituents, were never notified. I have not verified this, but if the county met the minimum statutory requirements of posting a notice on the bulletin board in the courthouse at least 72 hours prior to the meeting, it clearly wasn't sufficient. And for discussion of a topic with the potential to impact so many of your constituents' lives, don't you feel a moral obligation to do something more than just the bare minimum? If you wanted to engage the citizens, maybe you could have done something like issue a press release or send out a postcard.
And we popped the slide up there. This was a slide that was given in that public workshop, and the media attended that public workshop. And if you'll notice, the number 1 project list, at the top of the list, it says Inner Loop East. So from the beginning, Inner Loop East was listed as one of the projects of the 7 that was included in that bond issue. And all of that was before the bond issue actually became the ballot. This was in July the 28th of 2022. So several months before the election.
We're not disputing that the Inner East Loop was on the project list. We've shown it in the movie we created back in February, and we've even introduced it in court on a number of occasions, highlighting the fact that the Inner East Loop was the number 1 listed project. Having garnered that position and being deemed worthy of the top spot, a reasonable person might assume that it would be at least one of the most discussed items. However, in all subsequent interviews you gave to the media, not once did you ever talk about the Inner East Loop. Why is that? Why didn't you talk about it? To all of us, it appears as if you're trying to hide the project. This is very similar to the tactics we see up in Washington, D.C., where they take a very important piece of legislation and attach riders to it for various pet projects, also known as pork barrel politics. Finally, in each of the above-mentioned interviews, you refer to the bond program list as, quote, projects we're all familiar with, I believe this to be a mischaracterization of the facts. I concede that most of us probably had some level of knowledge about the other 6 roads in need of repair. However, based on the amount of public outcry, clearly the Inner East Loop was not a project we are all familiar with.
So next, show the next slide. So there was mailers that were mailed out to promote what the election was about, and so go ahead and show it. There's one. Do the next one also. These are those 2 are the front and the back of a mailer that was sent out, not once but twice. So go to that second page, and then what I did was blew this up so hopefully we can read it there to the next slide. So, and what I did on this thing was I went ahead and labeled this red writing that's on that project 1, 2, 3, 4. That wasn't a part of that mailer, but what I did was look at what was presented at that workshop in July of 2028, July the 28th of 2022, and I put the first on the list was Project 1. The first on that list was East Loop, and if you'll look, Project 1 here, it says Bryan Inner Loop East from State Highway 6 to W.D. Fitch, new location Super Street. That is that long red line, and you can see it on the upper right-hand side of that particular map, which was mailed out not once, but twice to every registered voter in Brazos County. Full transparency. Everyone should have known. I mean, I don't know what's in any voter's mind when they go to the polls.
Let's start out by acknowledging that the mailers you're referring to here were sent out by a PAC. And as we all know, PACs are notorious for half-truths or false and misleading information, so anything they may say or publish must be taken with a grain of salt. However, this raises a bigger question. What was your involvement with this PAC that you're able to testify with certainty in court and on the record as to the actions it took or how it was handled? Additionally, was it appropriate for you to be involved with the PAC at this level? Now, let's look at the mailers. To be clear, I never received one prior to the bond election. In December of 24, when we met with you and John Polster in the court's chambers, we were provided these 3 mailers. We'll start by looking at the one you showed in court. The mailer you showed in court was so small that it had to be blown up to be able to see what it said. How are we supposed to know what it says if it's illegible? Secondly, the red line you refer to here is nowhere near the study area. Is this an accurate representation of what the East Loop is supposed to be? Is this the kind of misinformation that we're supposed to base our votes on? Now, if I read what's to the right of the map, under the heading of Proposition A, it says, Proposition A will fund vital improvements to widen, resurface, and upgrade roads and bridges throughout the community. This will increase safety, reduce traffic, and divert cross-county travelers away from our schools and neighborhoods. I don't see anything in there about creating new roads. Further down the page, there's another paragraph about Proposition A, and it reads, Prop A will allow the local investment in infrastructure projects to be leveraged for significant state funds to improve local roads. TxDOT has more demand for projects than it has the resources to fund. Projects with local funds invested move up the priority list. Again, nothing in here about putting a new road through my neighbor's pasture. Here's the second one we received. Similar map. Here's the third one. It's a little different than the others. Notice it doesn't have the red line up here depicting the East Loop. However, it does have a really small box down here that looks kind of like the project list. It's so small that you can't even read it. So, is this the kind of accurate information we should rely on to make our vote? I agree with you that everyone should have known before they went to the polls. But how would we know? Neither you or any other elected official made an effort to talk about the Inner East Loop. How would we know what our government is up to if they won't at least make the effort to inform us? Further, should the county really be relying on the PAC to inform the voters? Wasn't that your job as our elected representative? Not to advocate, but to educate us to ensure that we're not misinformed.
I don't know what's in any voter's mind when they go to the polls. Clearly, they voted down Prop B, which was for fees, car fees for the RMA.
Now that you've brought up the RMA, let's review this video from November 15th of 2022 when you had a discussion about this very topic with another one of your citizens.
What the citizens voted down was a $10 fee. They did not vote down the RMA. And that fee would have gone toward projects, not for, I mean, that was the information that was put out, which was incorrect, that fee was going to be for organization and running of the RMA. That was not correct. That money would have been used for projects only. It could not be used for that organization. The citizens spoke, don't have a problem with it. They said that they didn't want it based on a lot of, in my opinion, misinformation.
There in court, you stated that you were aware the public voted down the projects the RMA hoped to pursue. What were those 3 projects? Reading from this document downloaded from the RMA's website, number 1, Arrington Road and W.D. Fitch intersection. Number 2, the Rellis campus access. And number 3, the Eastern Inner Loop. So on November 15th, just 1 week after the election, you acknowledged in court that you were aware the public had voted down those 3 projects. Since we voted down the Inner Loop over on Proposition B, why would you execute a contract for a project that the citizens had just voted down? Who are you to overturn the will of the people?
So they voted against that, but supported by 67%. That's what the vote was, 67% positive on the bond issue projects that was fully transparent. Everything was out there for the public to see. Go to the next slide. So, and this just shows, this was the results from the election. 67.13 was for, and against was 32.87. It was the people of Brazos County that voted were fully in support of that bond issue, which included all of the 7 projects. The election results were clear mandate of the people, 67%. Approval to move forward on the proposed bond projects.
Rather than spinning the data to support your narrative, let's have an honest discussion about the facts. Referring to the report from the election office, Brazos County had 126,229 registered voters on the day of the election. Only 55,768, or roughly 44%, participated in the election, and of that number, only 37,436, or 29% of registered voters, supported Proposition A. While 29% of voters may have been sufficient to win the day in a midterm election cycle, I doubt many people would call that a mandate. So I acknowledge the truthfulness of your statement and ask that you offer me the same courtesy and acknowledge the truthfulness of mine. Before we move on, let's move down the page and look at the results for Proposition B. Those RMA projects we discussed earlier, they were very unpopular, receiving only 23,018 votes, or roughly 18% of registered voters voted in favor of those RMA projects. So shall we call this a mandate? I say again, who are you to overturn the will of the voters?
The 7 projects were selected by a collaborative effort by Brazos County, 2 cities, Texas A&M, and TxDOT. Some of the projects were fully funded, not fully, they were partially funded, but would likely be years before they would actually be built, and I'm talking about the other 6, without the bond fund passing. The funds for the East Loop were to be used to get through the state and federal clearance to preserve a route. There's no money available for construction of the East Loop. The East Loop was on prominent display for all registered voters to see. In the wording on the ballot, it was outside bond counsel that tries to make sure that we're all totally in compliance. Outside bond counsel is the one that gave us the wording for the ballot. But what you have to look at is that, okay, the ballot may not say every particular project, but what you advertise as, that's where you hold the commissioner's feet to the fire, is here's what they said they're going to do, and then they make sure that that's exactly what they're doing.
The word counsel can be defined several different ways. So are you referring to John Polster, the county's $15,000 a month paid consultant? Or was the outside bond counsel maybe somebody that worked for his firm, ITS? Or was this a totally separate third-party legal firm specializing in ballot language? Who exactly was this bond counsel? Regardless, we're not questioning whether or not the ballot was compliant. We question its morality. The lack of detail on the ballot itself was misleading and lends to our argument that the people didn't know what they were voting for. I stand behind my statement that the ballot language was broad and vague, lending itself to abuse and misappropriation. If the court so decided, it could completely throw out that draft project list and pursue something completely different, remaining within the bounds of the law. And the public needs to be aware of this. For this exact reason, a piece of legislation, Senate Bill 1389, has been introduced in Austin and is currently under consideration in the Local Government Senate Committee that would require the taxing agency proposing the bond to, quote, list and clearly describe each structure or improvement included in the specific project for which the debt obligations are to be authorized. Or in other words, the ballot language must match the sales pitch. So here we are trying to hold your feet to the fire, and we continue to be ignored.
That's where you hold the commissioner's feet to the fire, is here's what they said they're going to do, and then they make sure that that's exactly what they're doing. And those 7 projects are still, there's nothing's changed. It's absolutely exactly the same as it was proposed from the beginning at that workshop, through all the advertisements that got sent out, exactly the same projects, including that East Loop. It's the responsibility of this court to respect the will of the people. And as county judge, I'll make sure this is done with integrity and transparency. It's not my position to say, I'm going to overturn the election that was duly done by the citizens of Brazos County, overwhelmingly in support of a proposition. And for me to, that would be totally inappropriate for this court or me to say, well, we're going to toss out what you told us to do and do something totally different. Sorry. That's really all I have to say.
Can I address the court?
No. No.
At the transportation workshop we've been discussing, the county's consultant stood at the lectern and told the court that if you would spend the bond funds for the schematic design, environmental clearance, right-of-way acquisition, and utility relocation, he could get the project picked up by TxDOT within 6 to 9 months. That's less than a year. So when we hear you say it's just a study, or the county doesn't have the money for this, it sounds disingenuous. Your consultant in court told you that he could get it picked up by the state in under a year. So to say that it won't get built in your lifetime doesn't seem true. And the plan never was for the county to pay for this. The plan was to have the state pick it up all along. A project of this magnitude with the potential to impact so many people's lives should have been discussed with the public ad nauseum for years prior to any action being taken. The fact is, the property owners were never notified. Not in 2016, when Dan Rudge originally drew the lines through our property and it was approved by Nancy Berry. Not in 2017, when Carl Mooney got the line moved out of Emerald Forest. Not in 2019, when the city of Bryan was moving the line to accommodate economic development. Not in 2022 at the transportation workshop, or in the lead up to the election, or at any point in between. So don't tell me it's been fully transparent. The fact is, the property owners were never notified. So here's what we see. This map from the city of Bryan that shows how they'd like to carve up our quiet community, fulfill the dreams of the Bryan mayor to have neighborhoods full of $700,000 to $800,000 homes with multiple retail and shopping locations as an alternative to South College Station. When we consider these facts, in light of the continued stonewalling of this court, it doesn't appear as if you're doing the will of the people. It looks more like a coordinated effort between the county and the city of Bryan to abuse the power of eminent domain, depriving us all of our property rights. It is not my intention to be disrespectful to you or this court, but we sincerely desire to have a public discussion with you in court and on the record. It would be good if you would consider our request to extend the comment period on the current set of alignments from 17 to 90 days to ensure that all residents and property owners in Brazos County have the opportunity to submit comments and make their voices heard. It would be better to consider our request to place the Inner East Loop on the court's agenda so we could have a public discussion. But ultimately, it would be best to please consider our request to pause the contract with Quiddity for 90 days so that we could have a full public discussion and determine once and for all whether or not the public supports this project. In this scenario, you bear no risk and no cost. If you're right, and there is overwhelming public support for this project, then that will be made clear. But if we're right, and the public does not support this project, that will also be made clear, and the county will have the opportunity to save millions of dollars. Either way, you reinforce your position as that selfless public servant we all desire. Thank you for your attention to this important matter.